Hi, everyone. Welcome to session two. Before we get into the content for today, I just want to go over two or three things that people have asked me about through email. Uh, and the first has to do with the concept statements. Um, they're listed as being just one page long, that's double spaced, 400 to 500 words. And I don't really want them any longer, just because if you write a lot, say you write 7 or 8 pages, you might change your mind later on. And I do want to give you the flexibility to have the opportunity to change your mind or to alter it at short notice. Also, I just want to see what you're up to. That's just a general view of what you're planning to do, you and your partner, if you're working in pairs, or individually if you're working on your own. And I will be posting them on Canvas, and then we can all look at them. That's part of the new learning environment, is that we collaborate and we share information. Second thing I want to talk about is if you're doing a final project and you might be taking photographs to include in your proposal, and you might be inclined to put some students in the photographs. If you do, make sure they're not identifiable, have their backs to the camera, just because they are going to be on a password protected site, Canvas, but they could be copied and moved to other sites as well. So just bear that in mind, just for the sake of anonymity, just to protect your student's identity. Just make sure they're not identifiable. Thirdly, is a reminder that this Wednesday we're going to have a Zoom session. I'll send out the invite on Monday or Tuesday, and it's an hour long at 4:30. It's not going to be laden with any content. It's really just an opportunity for people to ask me questions, maybe ask about your project, ask about the concept statements, maybe get to know you. If you're online, I might ask you, where you're living, what school you're at. And that reminds me that there still is that biography page on Canvas if people want to fill that out. I think 7 or 8 or 9 people have filled it out so far. So now we'll move into the content for today. And today there's an overarching theme, and the theme is it's more or less about human rights and responsibilities and equity and fairness and safety and legalities as well. So we want to make sure when we design learning environments that we're doing so in a way that allows people to feel safe and secure and protected, and we're not doing anything that violates any legal responsibilities we might have as teachers or employees or employers. And also, what applies to the classroom space might also apply to the workspace as well. And so, I think I want you to think about human rights in the workspace just as you would think about human rights in the classroom and vice versa. So, I've got about 8 different websites we're going to visit, and they're just resources. I'll go over each of them briefly with you. After that, I'm going to talk about a code of ethics for educational technology that's been developed by the AECT, the Association for Education, Communications, and Technology. They set this up. I'll go over that with you. I want to talk about copyright. There's a very good document for teachers called Copyright Matters. I use it in all my classes, with particular emphasis on how to handle citations off the internet. And finally, I want to just go over briefly universal design for learning, which sort of transferred from the world of architecture into education, allows multiple means of access for people with disabilities. Just as you have a ramp going up to a building, there's different ways to gain access to the content in an educational situation. So just ensuring when you design learning environments that you're aware of these things. I don't expect you to use them in all the environments you design for this course, but just that you're aware of them. So further on down the road in your careers, you can maybe use some of these resources as you design and develop learning environments. So we'll go right in to Canvas and start looking at these. In session two, there are 8 websites listed under ethical and respectful learning environments. I'm just going to go over each one briefly and just discuss how they might inform the design work you're doing, whether you're creating new learning environments or just developing lessons or unit plans. And as I said, try to think about respectful learning environments as based upon human rights legislation and human rights considerations. And the first one I have pertains to exactly that. It's the BC Human Rights Legislation and Tribunal. It talks about the BC Human Rights Code, gives you information about that. It discusses how to set up and establish, initiate a human rights tribunal, but also has 17 grounds for discrimination. And I think teachers should be aware of these, and I'm sure most teachers are. It's not something that is brand new to them, and we've been working with these for decades now, really. The next site is Respectful Workplace and Learning Environment Policy. I like this website. It's from a small college in northern Alberta. And what it does, it conflates, it puts together the learning environment and the workplace environment policy. Because when you think about it, a learning environment is a workplace environment for teachers as well as students. I mean, it isn't really a job, but in a way, it kind of is a job. And this kind of human rights situation and conditions that apply to a workplace also apply to a learning place or a learning environment. So this is just something you might consider reading. And well, it's not an obscure college. It's a little college in northern Alberta, but it has a really good job of discussing bullying, discrimination, disrespectful behavior, and expectations on employees and employers. The third one is creating welcoming, caring, respectful, and safe learning environments. This is from Alberta Education, and I included it. It has a fair bit of information about sexual orientation and gender identity, SOGI issues. They're embedded in this, and they're attached to the Alberta Bill of Rights to Protect Children. What's also interesting, this was done in 2015. I'm not sure if the new government in Alberta today would have a similar kind of focus with the same emphasis on SOGI. It may not, but it's just a reminder that politics can have a lot to do with influencing human rights and expectations of things that go on in the workplace and in classroom practice. I just want to talk a bit. The next three are about Indigenous rights and Indigenous peoples. And the first one is commonly referred to as UNDRIP, which is an acronym. It's United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And there's a number of references in here to education and learning, that Indigenous people should have a right to govern and control their own educational systems and be represented in curricula, and have their culture thought of as equal and not not be discriminated against. So that is a founding document of Indigenous rights. Canada has a Truth and Reconciliation Commission and calls to action. And there are a number of calls to action that pertain specifically to teaching and learning and education. This site has nice topics designated. The calls to action between 6 and 12 are all about education. To eliminate discrepancy of federal education funding for First Nations children. Here is some information. Provide sufficient funding to close the educational achievement gaps. 10, item 3 is developing culturally appropriate curricula. This one really pertains to teachers, what we are doing in classrooms. Protecting Aboriginal languages is mentioned here. Respecting and honoring treaty relationships. So those are topics to consider. And then there's further specific ones into education and reconciliation. Calls to action 62 to 65. Make age-appropriate curriculum on residential schools, treaties and Aboriginal peoples' historical contemporary contribution to Canada, a mandatory education requirement for kindergarten to grade 12. Pretty specific for educators in Canada. Provide necessary funding. We call developing and implementing kindergarten to grade 12 curriculum and learning resources for Aboriginal education. And here's another one that applies specifically to me, identifying teacher training needs relating to the above. So there should be funding available to encourage and teach teachers how to incorporate Indigenous perspectives, Indigenous ways of teaching and learning into their curriculum and curriculum development. It's difficult to start teaching about Indigenous perspectives when a person is not Indigenous. And we're encouraged to rely on Indigenous coordinators in schools and specialists that can help teachers do this. A good place to start, though, if you're in a classroom, is just First Peoples Principles of Learning. It's a document that was developed by FINESC in BC, and there's 9 different principles that you can use. And a lot of them are really best practice principles for teaching. Learning is holistic, reflexive, experiential, and relational. a lot of that is reflected in BC's new curriculum. It involves consequences of one actions. It's generational. It recognizes the role of Indigenous knowledge. It's embedded in memory history. So this is a really excellent document to start um, including Indigenous perspectives in classroom practice in BC. A couple more. 10 tips for a safe and respectful classroom. For some reason, I found this on an Australian website, and it has a nice little infographic that you can download, a PDF resource. And I just think if teachers look at these things, and most teachers do, let all your students know you respect and care about them, set up a classroom culture of inclusion and respect, acknowledge students who demonstrate kindness, respect, and thoughtfulness, use positive approaches when teaching students about unacceptable behaviors, encourage your students to practice using social and emotional skills in the classroom, work with students to develop their classroom expectations, provide learning opportunities that encourage cooperation, cohesion, and compassion among students. Model the positive behaviors you'd like to see in your classroom. That's from Gandhi, is be the change you'd like to see in the world. Provide an opportunity for students to take responsibility for their learning. And the last one, provide an opportunity for students to recognize and acknowledge each other's strengths. Those are 8 different sites. This doesn't necessarily mean you have to read everything, because some of the documents are hundreds of pages. And it doesn't mean you have to include everything into your final project for this course. But it does mean you should be aware of these things for maybe beyond the course, when, down the road, when you're designing learning environments for your school or developing lessons or units for your own classroom practice. Think about these things and think about ways to make uh, learning environments safe, ethical, respectful. Educational technology does have a code of ethics. It was developed by the Association for Educational Communications and Technology. It's been around for about 15 years. It's listed on their website. I have it right here. It has a table of contents and a forward introduction. It gives an historical perspective. It shows the code of ethics. There's a preamble, commitment to the individual, commitment to society, commitment to the profession. And it's really interesting to look at some of the situations that they present. Um, they're fulfilling the letter or spirit of the law. So each one of these is about an individual that's put in a situation where they have to make an ethical decision. And it's pretty interesting. Uh, whose views, yours or your institution's, competing with your employer. This is a typical one where people get in trouble. Sometimes teachers do. They end up running their own business that's in competition with what they're doing in their job at the school, and they end up kind of moonlighting and making money, but they're actually competing with their professional job in the school. So there's a situation here, it's explained, and then there's a discussion afterwards. There's issues of harassment, of bias, gifts and gratuities, what happens when you're responsible for purchasing materials for your school and it turns out you're buying them from someone you went to elementary school with and you're good friends with. Where do you draw the line? A lot of times, uh, your job will have processes and procedures that you clearly follow, and sometimes the best policy is just do your job. These are full of situations that you might find interesting, and I'm sure all of us have been in situations where we felt like we were not being treated fairly and not being treated ethically. And it's good to have a little bit of backup to say, according to this policy, you're not treating me fairly, or I'm not being treated fairly. Now, this code doesn't, it's not enforced in any way. I've never heard of anybody being charged with violating the Educational Technology Code of Professional Ethics, but it is just something to know that it's out there, it exists, and it does set some standards and boundaries that you can rely on and maybe present in any kind of case when you're in a situation where you do feel that you're not being treated in an ethical manner. On the Canvas website for session 2, there's a title of Digital Citizenship, And under that, I've got Copyright Matters. And if I click on that, it brings up a document. It was created by the Canadian Ministers of Education, and it's a document specifically targeted for teachers, some key questions and answers for teachers. And it's about Bill C-11, the kind of new and improved copyright law, copyright legislation for Canada. It's got lots of frequently asked questions, and it just talks about limits for copying materials. You can copy one chapter of a book or 10% to distribute to your students. You can take full books online, put them on your website if it's password protected. Um, and one thing that I'm quite interested in is on 21, chapter 21, can teachers and students copy from the internet? I'm just going to breeze down there, scanning this way, and I hope no one gets too dizzy as I'm going through this, but it's on page 19. Can teachers and students copy from the internet? Well, yes, you can. Publicly available materials are those posted online. You can't use them if it says directly you can't not copy this. If it has some kind of warning like that, then you can't copy it. But it says routine classroom uses may be made of publicly available internet materials, such as incorporating online text or images into homework assignments, performing music or plays online for peers, exchanging materials with teachers or peers, or reposting a work on a restricted access course website. And that means password protected learning management system like Canvas. It also says to encourage copyright awareness and respect in all circumstances, students and educators are required to cite the source of the internet materials they use. And there's no one proper way of citing it. I've actually listed right on Canvas, citing online resources. APA website citations usually include the author, the publication date, the title of the page or article, the website name, and the URL. If there is no author, and often there isn't an author, or start the citation with the title of the article. If the page is likely to change over time, add a retrieval date. Now, Copyright Matters is something I use in all my courses. I think it's something every teacher should be aware of. And it allows the learning environment to be respectful because it respects the people who create media and resources that are used by teachers. And it makes sure teachers are not incorrectly or inappropriately appropriating materials or pretty much stealing materials from people who make a living out of making videos, audio recordings, and write books and things like that that are often used in the classroom. So I think it's a really important document to read over. If we're on our session page and we scroll down to Universal Design for Learning and click on Set BC and UDL Toolkit, this is a website presented by Set BC, which is Special Education Technology BC, and it contains 10 different modules. They're video resources available for teachers. They go back to 2015, 2012 to 2015, so they're a little bit dated, but the videos are good. They're generally interviews with teachers, or they're overviews of how to use certain software packages to help support students with disabilities in your classroom. I'm not going to go into each one of these videos. I'm just going to leave it for you as a resource, and I think it'd be useful for classrooms and also in business situations as well, just ensuring that persons with disabilities are treated in a fair, respectful way in learning or work environments. So that brings us to an end of session 2. It went a little longer than I expected to. Hopefully, future videos will be a little bit shorter. I'd like to keep them between 12 and 15 minutes. Last time I asked you to read chapters 1 and 2 of Panagia and Estance, and they introduce ideas of pedagogy, the 5 C's, which are combinations, connoisseurship, content, context, and change. And then they discuss these varying types of innovative learning environments. For next session, session 3, I'll ask you to read chapters 3 and 4 in that text. And also just a reminder, on Wednesday at 4:30, there's a Zoom session. I will be sending out an invite for everybody. And it's not obligatory. You can attend or not attend it, but I will be taping it if you can't make it. And like I said, it's not content-based. It's more or less an opportunity to ask me questions and just have some general discussion about learning environments and educational technology and classroom practice. So I'll see some of you on Wednesday, and I'll see all of you in session 3, which is in a week's time. Thanks so much, and have a good week.